Well, good morning, everyone. We're glad that you guys made it with us here today. Hopefully, you have been blessed by the worship that Robert and the guys have brought to us this morning. As you can tell, it's a little different. I'm not there with you all today. I wish I could be, but I'm under a quarantine right now, and so to keep all of you guys safe and to keep my family safe, we're gonna preach from here this morning here on our front porch. I think this would be a good place for us to still have a conversation together, and because we don't want to stop in our series, we don't want anything to get paused through that. We're gonna continue on that this morning, and I wanted to say in prepping this sermon, it was difficult for me because this is a harder topic, and I think I end up saying this a lot at the beginning of my sermons, but this is equally as difficult for me as sermons have been in the past. Because growing up, I never felt like I really wanted for anything. My parents always provided for me. All my needs were met, and most of my wants were met. I never really had to do without. And last week, you guys talked about being thankful when you're in abundance, when you have multiple things to be thankful for, when you have lots to be thankful for. And that sounds counterintuitive, but that's a lot of how I grew up. I grew up with overabundance. I had whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, most of the time. I mean, sure, I appreciated those things, but looking back, I don't know that I ever actually was truly thankful for the ability to not have to struggle like some of my friends did, not have to worry about where my next meal might come from, or go without a toy even. I know for not everybody that's the case, though. I know for some of you that you may have had to struggle growing up. You may have had to struggle even now with your life and not feeling like you have enough to get by, enough to be thankful for, really. I think some of you have had hard times in your life. Some of you have struggled with sickness. You've struggled with getting by with the bills, getting by with payments. Some of you have struggled like you just don't have enough. You feel like you just don't have enough to be thankful because of it. That's what we're going to talk about this week. We're going to talk about how you can be thankful when you feel like life just isn't going your way. How you can be thankful when you feel like you don't have enough. So in planning for this sermon, I had to really consider, have I ever not had enough? And like I mentioned before, growing up, I always felt like I had plenty. I've always felt like my parents took really good care of me. I always felt like I was well taken care of. But I started thinking, are there times in my life where I can honestly say I would have been too low to be thankful? And there's one instance in my life in recent history that's happened to my wife and I even, that I thought this might be a time when I would have been upset to the point where I would not have been able to been thankful to God. So you guys know we have two little boys, Eli and Lincoln. Eli's 4 and Lincoln is a year and a half almost. And before we had Lincoln, Eli was kind of a trouble child. He had a lot of not a lot of issues, but he always measured low when we went to the pre-op appointments, and he was always, Nicole used to always say that he was going to be a handful because he was a handful before he came out of the womb. And so when we went to do our pre-pregnancy or pre-birth appointments that you do with each child, with Lincoln, we got there and there were issues to start with, but not anything major. And we were thinking, okay, well, it's going to be the same thing as it was with Eli, kind of a rough pregnancy, and we'll get there. Well, with Lincoln, a few months in, we started to realize that there were some real issues happening. The doctor told us that his heart wasn't developing the way it should be. His heart rate was lower than it needed to be, and we were nervous that we might lose him. And the doctor gave us some medication, some things to try to go through to try to make sure that we could get him growing, get him moving the way he needed to be. But we were nervous. We were nervous, as I think any parent would be, of what's going to happen. Are we going to have a child in 7 months, or are we going to have a stillbirth and deal with that situation? And I know for some of you, as you can tell, our situation panned out for the good, but I know for some of you that hasn't happened. Some of you, that situation panned out in the negative. And so for me, I had to think, if it would have panned out in the negative, could I have lived a life of thankfulness because of that? Would that have put me so low that I would have felt like I couldn't be thankful? That's what brings me to this point that I want to ask, the question I want to ask for us to get into this topic. Are there times in your life where you felt like, I'm too low to be thankful? Honestly, I can't be thankful in this situation. I'm too many things have happened to me. I think the answer to that question is different, obviously, for all of us. I think we all deal with different situations, circumstances. Our struggles are all totally different. But there's a point I think that we have. I think there's a point that a lot of us get to where we feel like we have too little to be thankful. We feel like we just can't be thankful in this situation. And I know life can be hard. There are legitimate times where you feel like you've been dealt a crummy hand, where you feel like you're just down to nothing, and there's not really anything in your life that you can be thankful for. However, I think regardless of our situation, thankfulness is something that we should be embodying as Christians. Colossians 2, 6 and 7 says this, "So then, just as you receive Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in Him, rooted and built up in Him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness." I think part of what has made us struggle with this idea of being thankful in the face of loss or lack is, ironically, our culture of abundance. I think the fact that we have so much is really forced us to lose this idea of thankfulness. We live in a world that offers so much, and unfortunately the sheer amount of stuff that we can aspire to have or do or be, when we don't attain those things or we don't get those things, it makes us feel like we don't have enough. We feel ungrateful. We feel like we haven't reached this peak. You know, if Link would have died, that would have been horrible. It would have been an awful thing. But God had still blessed us with a child. And to look at the negative of him dying as erasing the positive of him providing another child for us, that would have been wrong. And so I think there's a huge common denominator that's the root of the issue that we find with thankfulness. This huge common denominator that points us all to this idea, because of our abundance, to be unthankful when we don't reach the exact things we want to reach. And that common denominator is contentment. Let me try to show you what I mean. I mentioned it before. We have two boys. And to me, it's crazy sometimes watching how they entertain themselves. I don't know if you have young kids at home, any of you that have young kids at home, or even, middle-aged kids in their 10 to 12 range. It's crazy to see what they entertain themselves with at times. My boys will take boxes, for instance, from the gifts that we give them. They'll take the boxes and they'll play with them much longer than they will the toys. We've got a huge pile of toys in our living room that they don't touch. But if we get a new box in the house, they want to play boat or store out of the box. They want to use it like a spaceship. They do all these different things with the box, and it makes them happy. It's this simple little thing that gives them joy. It's simpler. It's not complicated. And I think we've lost that. In growing up, we've lost that sense of wonder, of joy, to be able to see what God's providing for us in the small things, the little things. And I think to get back to that would be something that would really help us to understand this idea of contentment. And so to try to bring our minds back to what that looked like, I've got a short video I want to show you guys. So check this video out.
Okay, what makes you happy?
Don't judge me. I like rainbows, sparkles, and unicorns. I'm that kind of girl.
What makes you happy?
What makes me happy? What makes me super happy? Eating candy. Eating bacon.
Usually just eating.
My favorite foods makes me happy. Ice cream. Bubblegum. Cotton candy.
Tacos.
Chicken candy.
And feeding live mice to my friend Snake. That brings me joy.
What makes you happy?
Animal cats. Playing with chickens.
Puppies. My dog.
He's sweet and so cuddable. Oh.
What makes you feel happy?
Something that makes me happy is when they play my brother's iPad with me. A toy. When I get Legos. Having a play date. Playing on electronics. Playing games.
Inside games or outside games?
inside games.
What's your favorite game?
Dragon City, Pokemon, Roblox.
Super Smash Bros.
What about when you lose in video games?
I don't care that much because I know I'm really bad.
It's not about winning, it's about having fun.
What makes you happy?
When I get to watch movies, I try to find the movies that are free online.
Playing board games.
Dance parties.
Yeah, being in a pool and in a hot day.
When I go swimming.
What makes you happy?
Friendship.
Yeah, have more friends than I can count.
When a friend comes over.
Seeing all my long lost friends.
If there's something like fun, like if all my friends are like playing a game and they say I can play, yeah, that's what makes me happy.
Happy, like thinking about things I'm excited for.
Getting rats to attack people.
Getting rats to attack people makes you happy?
Yes! Watch out.
When I get out my house.
Babies.
Happy face. And presents. I have a purple squishy.
What makes you happy?
Not doing homework, especially math. When I get to watch TV shows with my family.
When I'm around my family every day.
They're very loving to me and they always support me.
What makes me happy is when like my parents are happy. So like when I do things with them and they smile, I get to smile. And when they laugh, I get to laugh.
What makes you happy?
My mommy. Mommy.
Hugging my mom.
Snuggling with my stuffed animals. My mom. Watching a movie. And she tells me that everything but monsters are not real. And mommy stays forever. I missed her.
What makes you happy?
When I'm with my mommy and my daddy.
Yes, when Dad beats me in a babe battle.
My dad coming home.
My little sister doesn't take my things.
I think what makes me happy is going to my grandma's house. My nanny makes me happy.
When my parents take me to a carnival. When I get to go on vacation in Turks and Caicos with my family.
Probably when I go to like theme parks with my friends.
Disney World.
Play in the snow. When it snows, it makes me happy. When it's not raining. Rainbows and flowers. Going on walks in the forest.
What makes you happy?
Having good dreams.
Being generous.
When people be good.
Learning how to do something I don't know how to do. Giving to others because I like to give like money or food to homeless.
World peace.
Can it be surprised happy?
Sure.
If my sister did a somersault over my head,
What if she accidentally kicked you on the way?
I would just say it's okay, it was an accident.
Isn't it funny, the things that bring them joy and the things that maybe we take for granted, like our family, like the small little times we get to spend with each other, those kind of things that maybe we take for granted. One of the kids mentioned playing video games, and that's something I love to do. And I know that when a new game comes out, I want the new game. And I always take for granted the fact that I even have a console to play on, that I even have the games that I currently have to use. And so I think for us, it's getting back to these ideas of these simple things. The idea that, because when you get older, here's the thing, boxes aren't enough anymore. They're not good enough anymore. When we get older, we need more to keep us entertained. We need more to keep us happy. We need more to make us feel like we have enough to be thankful. The big idea that I want you guys to grasp from this sermon today is contentment helps us to be thankful regardless of the situation. If you're content with the situation that you're in right now, you can be thankful to God for what He's providing for you on top of that. Any small amount that He gives you, you can be thankful for. Now, you may be in a season right now where you legitimately don't have enough. You may be in a season where you legitimately do not have enough money, enough health, enough stability. This virus, I know, has stripped a lot from people. It's stripped away, it's taken jobs, it's stifled relationships, it's even taken lives to some extent. And so, but sometimes our loss, even though those are things that we can't help, sometimes our loss can be self-inflicted. Maybe you spent too much money on that hobby. I know that I do that from time to time. Maybe you've let the bills go because of that. Now, I try to maintain we don't let any bills go, but maybe you're in that situation. Maybe you've spent too much on your hobby and you've let your bills kind of pile up. regardless of whether these ideas are self-inflicted, whether these points of not enough are self-inflicted, I think we can still be thankful if we resolve to be content. Paul wrote a letter to the Philippians, and if you got your Bibles, you can go ahead and flip there with me this morning. We're going to be kind of based there this morning. But he wrote a letter there to try and talk to the church about the different things they were going through. And he wrote a specific part I think we misquote a lot of times, but it's about this idea of commitment. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and flip to Philippians chapter 4 for me real quick, and we're going to start in verse 10. Paul writes this: I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whether the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through Him who gives me strength. Now you may read that verse, and you may have heard that last verse before. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And that idea, people wear that at sport events all the time. They wear that when they're lifting. They wear that when they're whatever, fill in the blank. And a lot of times that verse is taken out of context, because we look at that verse as like, gimme, gimme, gimme. God, you can do this thing for me. I want more of it. But what Paul is saying here is that we need to be content with what we have. God can get us through even when we feel like we don't have enough. You might be saying, well, Paul doesn't understand the situation that I'm going through. Like, he doesn't understand the specific area that I'm struggling in my life, my situation that I'm dealing with. Well, here's the thing. When Paul's writing this letter, he's not like sitting in the lap of luxury somewhere writing about how you should stay content. I have plenty of stuff and you should just be content with what God gives you. No, Paul's in prison when he's writing this letter. He wrote this letter most likely on the way to his death. You know, he was in prison several times in Rome, but this is most likely the last imprisonment before he's going to go be killed. If there's anyone who would understand a reason to be discontented in his situation, it would be Paul. Let's think about Paul for a second. Who was he? Well, he was a Pharisee before he became Paul. He was Saul, the Pharisee. He was present at Stephen's stoning. He was a big part of the persecution of the first century church. And for him, he had family and friends that were a part of that life as well. And so when he meets Jesus on the road to Damascus, and when he has this conversion to Christianity, what do you think happens to Paul? Well, a lot of those friends and family that he had, he doesn't have anymore. He lost a lot of those people. And so not only is he dealing with that loss, but now he is being persecuted for a faith that he's taken up that he used to persecute. And on top of that, when he first came into the church, a lot of the new Christians didn't trust him because he was a huge persecutor of the church. And so he has enemies on the side he used to be on. He has enemies on the side he's on now. And he's in jail for this faith that he professes. I don't know about you, but that sounds like somebody who's going through a struggle. That sounds like somebody who's dealing with not having enough. But Paul yet still yells and screams from the jail cell, remain content. He's enduring these same struggles. He's enduring the same deal that he put on the first century church. But he's still yelling at them, hey, be content, be content. Here's the thing. I think there's several things that kind of push us away from what contentment looks like. But I want to talk about what the dangers are of being discontented. And so we're going to look at a couple of those things just for a second. So indulge me for a moment. But I want to talk about how our discontentment can drive us away from this idea of thankfulness. And first thing is this: discontentment is directed towards God. You know, Adam and Eve in the garden, and you guys know the story of creation and the story of the fall of man. Adam and Eve in the garden, they were discontented. The serpent came to Eve and said, hey, look, God's holding out on you. He wants you to have this thing. He doesn't want you to have, he wants to hold this to himself. He wants to hold this knowledge of good and evil to himself. He won't let you have this. He'll let you have everything else but this. And the serpent sowed discontentment in Eve's heart. This idea of God holding out from her and not having enough. And so Eve decided to fall into sin, and Adam decided to fall into sin with her, and then thus the history of man falls into sin because of this idea of discontentment. When we complain or lose our thanks in a tough situation, we're basically telling God that he hasn't provided for us, that he hasn't given of himself to us. We're saying that he hasn't done enough and we need more. One of the things I think about when I think about that idea is the Israelites in the Old Testament as well. You know, that God had led them faithfully for years. He had been so faithful to them through even their rebellion. But they decide, hey, God, we don't want to be led by you and your prophets anymore. We want a king. And so what do? They reach out to Samuel, and they say, Samuel, we want a king. And Samuel prays to God, and God raises up Saul to be their first king. And we know how that turns out. It's a weird cycle of mistakes and rebellion. Saul decides to lead for his own good, and he doesn't really do what God has ordered him to do. He falls away from that will, and he turns to what he wants to do. And David kind of falls into his own traps throughout that. Even though he's a man after God's own heart, he falls into his own trap because a man is a man sown with discontentment. And we see that cycle happen over and over and over again. Because I think that the issue, the reason that we get to this point, and the reason that man gets to this point, the reason Eve even got to this point, is because discontentment comes when we focus on what we don't have, when we focus on the things that we lack. I think comparison is a huge deal with this. I think when we live in a life that compares to other people, we live in a life of discontentment. And you guys already know where I'm going with this. You know where my mind's at, and I'm sure that you guys are already there at this point. But social media is one of those huge avenues for discontentment, because all we do on social media, for the most part, is compare. All we do is look at the next family, look at the next person, look at the next friend, see what they have, see what they do, and how much we lack because of what they're doing. We compare ourselves to this friend who just bought a brand new car. And you have a car, but it's not brand new. But that doesn't matter to you. You see that new car that they got, and you're like, man, how do they afford that? I work hard. I do well with my money. I should be able to afford a new car. You don't consider the fact that God's already blessed you with one. You don't have 6 vacations a year. It seems like they're always at the beach. They're always spending time there as a family. But maybe you paid off debt this year. Maybe you were able to pay down some student loans or pay off some kind of credit card debt or anything like that. Maybe you were able to go on a really nice vacation this year with your family. We need to be thankful in those situations and not compare ourselves to these other people who may have different circumstances. We don't know. Maybe you don't have the perfect kids. So you see your friends portray perfect kids on social media. And let me go ahead and tell you, no one has perfect kids. Nobody. I know I'm a young dad, but none of us have perfect kids. All of our kids screw up. All of our kids are crazy. That's a big old ruse you see on social media, that their families are perfect. Here's the thing. When we focus on these things that we lack, we sow this deep discontentment in our lives. And nothing begins to be good enough. We start to see everything as not enough. We start to see everything as loss, as bad, as God hasn't given me enough. He hasn't given me a nice spouse or good kids. He hasn't given me a nice house or a nice car. He hasn't given me these things that I want. Because discontentment can distort our past and destroy our present. Discontentment is this seed that takes away from what our past has done, and it takes away from what our present is doing right now. I think a lot of us live in this trap of, if I only had this, if only, if I could only get this promotion at work, if I could only get this new job, if I could only start this relationship, if I could only. So you don't have a brand new car. I don't think that's a problem. If you have a means to get where you need to get. Have you ever looked back on your life and you thought, man, those were the good old days. Those times were great. I want you to take a moment right now. I want you to think back to several years ago, back when you would consider your good old days. And as you're thinking, I want you to think, were you content back then? Were you actually okay with where you were? Or was there something more that you wanted? Was there something more that you needed to get to? See, I think discontentment makes it seem like everything was better back then, but it makes everything seem like right now it'll be better when we get there. It'll be better when we're at this point. It'll be better when we're past this struggle. Not only that, but I think it also takes our success and places it in front of what God's given us. It takes away the provision that God's made for us and makes it about what we've done. I had a friend once, we had lunch together, and he told me, man, I'm tired of people telling me how blessed I am and that how much God has given me. And I was like, man, that's kind of a rough thing to say. Why would you say that? And his idea is, well, hey, I've worked hard for where I'm at. I've done the work that I need to get where I'm going. I've put in the hours. I've studied. I've taken the lumps that I need to take to be able to get where I am. And yeah, where I agree, I think that's true, that you have to be self-disciplined to do those things. But God is blessing you constantly along the way. He's giving you opportunities. He's placing himself in front of you. Even for the atheist, he's giving these steps to be able to succeed, to be able to reach relationship with him, to be able to get to a point of contentment. See, I think my friend had a distorted view of his past, and it was destroying his present. And see, I think when we live in a life of discontentment, when we decide we don't want to be content with what we have anymore, we no longer have a present. It's always about the future. We don't live for right now. We don't look at the things that God is blessing us with right now. We think about what he can give us, what he will give us, rather than what he's giving us right now. When we decide that we're the authors of our success, we live in this cycle of discontentment. We want more and more to be happy, but sometimes losing is the right thing. Sometimes losing is the thing that needs to happen. Because here's the second point that I want us to get to. Need teaches us to trust God more. When we're at our lowest point, often that's when God is the strongest in our lives, when he shows up the most. John wrote this in his gospel in chapter 3, verse 30. He says, he must increase, Jesus must increase, I must decrease. Paul also wrote to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 10, that is why, for the sake of Christ, I delight in my weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties, for where I am weak, then I am strong. Why is Paul strong when he's dealing with all those things? It's because God is strong in his life. God is able to shine through in his life, and it's no longer him that's doing the things, it's God that's doing the things. When we can't rely on our own power, God's strength can grow in us. We can rely more so on his power. For those of us that we're in a situation of lack that's outside of our control. We didn't put this on ourselves. We didn't overspend, or we didn't make poor choices that led to lost relationships. For those of us that are in those situations that are outside of our control, this can be a huge point for us to be able to be thankful in this loss. That we can't be strong in our own, but God can be strong through us. Thankful that God has the ability to sustain us even in our weakness. You know, the witness that we can have, think about how great that is. The witness that we can bear in remaining thankful and content regardless of the situation that we're in. The witness that we can show for Christ to say, hey, look, I know that I'm dealing with a loss of a child. I'm dealing with loss of sickness. Maybe I'm dealing with a loss of a job, or I'm dealing with loss of income. Maybe I've lost my car or my house, or even I'm close to losing my life. We can be content in allowing God's strength to shine through us and be thankful and bear this witness to those around us for how strong God is and how much he provides for us. Because finally, here's the thing. You're not going to leave this place understanding exactly what contentment is, because contentment has to be learned. You've got to decide that I'm going to take up this burden of contentment. I'm going to learn how to be thankful regardless of the situation. We're not going to miraculously just leave this place and be okay with the situation that we're in. You may be in a crummy situation right now, like I mentioned before. We have to constantly work at it. Constantly remain vigilant on the ways that God is providing for us right now. Not allow our past to dictate how our present's going to work. Not allow our present to look like what we want our future to look like. But to be content that God is doing things for us right now, that he's blessing us in ways that we can be thankful for. When you constantly remind yourself of what God has done for you, these huge bumps in the road, these things that we struggle with constantly, they get a lot smaller. A lot smaller. And the things that we think we need to be happy, they become trivial. We don't need those things anymore. And so if we resolve to learn contentment, if we resolve to be content, that contentment will help us to be thankful even when we feel like we don't have enough. Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you so much that you have blessed me countlessly in my life. I'm so grateful that even though I am not worthy of the provision that you've given me, God, I just thank you that you have chosen to do that. And God, I thank you for the blessings you poured out on our congregation, God. I thank you for the situations that have been fixed by your hand. I thank you for how faithful you have been to those of us who pray to you earnestly and with a righteous heart, God. I just thank you so much that you are willing to be with us, and you have given us this avenue to be content in the blessings that you've given us, God. God, help us to be thankful when we feel like we just can't be thankful, God. I know that you are guiding us to that, and so I thank you, and I pray that as we leave this place, that we would have a heart of contentment, a heart that chases after you. We pray all this in your Son's precious name. Amen. Here's the issue, I think, with contentment for us as Christians. We deal with this easily because we have Christ. But the big issue with this idea is that if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, then you can't hope to be content outside of what he has to offer. You can't hope to be content if you don't have this hope that we have in relationship with him. Because, you know, Paul also wrote in Philippians 1, he said, "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." And for us as the Christian, that's the clear picture. For us to live is to live a life that's devoted to Christ. It's no longer our life anymore. And so it's easy for us to be content because we can give our life over to Christ to use. And if we lose, it's not because we're losing, it's Christ losing, and he's going to choose to move the pieces around the way he would. But if you're not a Christian, you don't know that kind of hope. And for the Christian, it's so impactful that his presence is ultimately moving us towards contentment. But for you, you can only hope to be content in what the world has to offer. You can only hope to be content in what you can achieve. And so maybe today is the day that you need to make a choice. Maybe today is the day that you need to decide that you're going to chase after this relationship that we're talking about here. Maybe Jesus sounds like somebody who you need in your life because your life is struggling with contentment. Maybe you're struggling with a lack in your life right now, and you need someone to help pull you out of this situation. Maybe today is that day. Maybe you need a group of people to surround yourself with, to be a part of a family who's going to get you through times that are tough and help you to remain content. Maybe you need those kind of people to hold you accountable, to keep you in a solid state of contentment. Or maybe you need to rededicate yourself to being content. Maybe you've fallen into a stupor of, God, you haven't done enough for me. God, you're not giving me enough. God, you're not providing enough for me. Maybe you need to find an avenue to be able to fall back into him, to fall back into his strength, to fall back into thankfulness for what he's giving you and what he's continuing to give you. Whatever those choices you may need to make today, we're going to play one more song. As the band has come up and begun playing, we're going to play one more song together. And if you need to make a commitment, there's some guys down here that will talk to you, to be able to speak with you. If you want to call me, you can call me at my number. You, reach us here at the church. You can talk to any of our leadership. I'm sure they would love to talk to you about what it means to enter into a relationship, or what it means to be a part of our body, what it means to rededicate yourself to Christ. Any of those things that you need to make a decision for today. This is the final song that we're going to play as a time that you can do that. And so I thank you guys for being a part of our service this morning, and I pray as we leave that you can be blessed and you can show contentment in a way that is necessary to give respect to the things that God has given us. Let's worship together.